The source of oxygen, called the respiratory medium, is air for the terrestrial animals and water for aquatic animals. Air is much less dense and less viscous, so it is easier to move into force through small passageways. Gas-tinged water is much more demanding. The amount of oxygen dissolved in a given volume of water varies, but is always less than equivalent to the volume of air. The part of the animal where the oxygen from the environment diffuses into living cells and carbon dioxide diffuses out is the respiratory surface. All living cells must be bathed in water to maintain their plasma membranes. Therefore, the respiratory surface of all animals are moist, and the oxygen and carbon dioxide must first dissolve in water before crossing the membrane. The respiratory system is a major key to gas exchange in the body. Gas exchange occurs at two sites in the body: in the lungs, where oxygen is picked up and carbon dioxide is released at the respiratory membrane, and at the tissues, where oxygen is released and carbon dioxide is picked up. Lungs are localized respiratory organs, typically subdivided into many pockets. Lungs are located in one location and is connected to other parts of the body by the circulatory system. Lungs have a dense net of capillaries just under the epithelium, which serves as a respiratory surface.
First up, the pharynx. It consists of the nasopharynx, the oropharynx, and the laryngopharynx. And this connects the nasal cavity to the larynx. For the larynx, that's known as your voice box. It's where air passes through to create sounds which help you talk. And this consists of the supraglottis, also known as the epiglottis, the glottis, and then also the subglottis, which you can see labeled in the diagram. And then we're going to move on into the trachea, also known as the windpipe. This is lined with cilia and mucus to transport particles up towards the pharynx, and this is what cleans the respiratory system by allowing the particles to be swallowed through the esophagus. And then from the trachea, we go into the bronchi. This is the air passageway from the trachea into the lungs. There's two bronchi, one for each lung. From the bronchi, we go into the bronchioles, which are the smaller airways branching from the bronchi into the lungs, kind of like tree branches, and there are around 30,000 of them in each lung. And then last is the alveoli. These are the air sacs at the tip of the bronchioles that allow for gas exchange. When inhaling, oxygen is diffused from the moist film of the epithelium and then into the capillaries. When exhaling, carbon dioxide diffuses from the capillaries across the epithelium and then into the surrounding airspace. Unlike other parts of the respiratory tract, such as the air passageways, alveoli lack cilia and are therefore more susceptible to disease. To counteract this susceptibility, the alveoli are covered in surfactants. And then for breathing is the ventilation of the lungs, and then the repeated exhalation and inhalation of air. Mammals use negative pressure breathing. So on inhalation, the expansion of the rib cage and the contraction of the diaphragm expand the chest cavity, which causes a decrease in the pressure and the expansion of the lungs to fill the space. The volume of the lungs increase as the rib muscles and diaphragm contract, and then the tidal volume is the amount of air inhaled in each breath.
The figure shown explains the control of breathing in humans. The normal blood pH is shown to be 7.4. When carbon dioxide levels in the tissues begin to rise, the blood pH drops. This could happen when you exercise. The medulla then detects the decrease in pH of cerebrospinal fluid. The sensors in the major blood vessels also detect a decrease in pH. The medulla then receives the signals from the vessels and sends signals to the rib muscles, and the diaphragm increases the rate and depth of ventilation. The blood carbon dioxide levels fall and the pH rises back to normal. The partial pressures of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the blood vary as the gases move between blood, air, and other body tissues. Blood arriving in the lungs has a low partial pressure of oxygen and a high partial pressure of carbon dioxide relative to air in the alveoli. In the alveoli, oxygen diffuses into the blood and carbon dioxide diffuses into the air. By the time the blood leaves the lungs and the pulmonary veins, The partial pressure of oxygen and partial pressure of carbon dioxide match the values for those gases in the alveoli.
This shows us how oxygen and carbon dioxide gas exchange occurs in our body in 8 steps. First, we inhale oxygen, then it goes through our alveolar spaces, down into our pulmonary veins through our heart, out into our systemic arteries, and down into the body tissues, which contain systemic capillaries, which is where primary gas exchange occurs, and oxygen converts into carbon dioxide. Then the carbon dioxide is transported through our systemic veins back into our heart, out through our pulmonary arteries, and then out of our bodies. This diagram shows the relationship between the pressure of oxygen and carbon dioxide at different points in the circulatory system, as numbered previously in this diagram here. So basically it's saying that at the first point, or at the first step in the process, when we inhale oxygen, the oxygen pressure is higher than it would be in step 5, which would be in the body tissues, or when that first primary gas exchange occurs. And as you can tell, that carbon dioxide intake is significantly lower than it is for oxygen. Respiratory pigments are proteins that transport oxygen and greatly increase the amount of oxygen that blood can carry. Another way of saying that is it is a molecule that increases how much oxygen the blood can carry. One of the key molecules that does this is hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a red protein that is responsible for transporting oxygen in the blood of vertebrates. It can carry 4 molecules of oxygen, 1 molecule for each iron-containing heme group. If you don't know what a heme group is, you're about to find out. Hemoglobin contains iron, heme, which gives hemoglobin the ability to bind to oxygen. It also contains oxygen molecules and polypeptide chains as well.
Hello, my name is Switzon Blair, and this is my video on the transfer from the oxygen from the blood cells to the cells in the tissue, and the transfer of carbon dioxide from the tissue to the red blood cells to the alveolar sac out of the body. All right, so these red apples represent red blood cells. The delicious looking Fruit Loops represent the oxygens, the 4 oxygens that the hemoglobin helps the red blood cells contain. All right, just ignore that. And what basically happens is this is the red blood stream. This is basically plasma. So as the red blood cells go through the stream and they pass the cell tissues, the cell signals that it needs oxygen. The red blood cells give the oxygen to the tissue. The tissue then releases carbon dioxide. It diffuses into the bloodstream. When it diffuses into the bloodstream, it can either be diffused into the plasma or it can form a bicarbonate ions. It become a carbonic acid. Ta-da! So this green pair, which is not really a green pair, but a red blood cell that has accepted the carbon dioxide and released its oxygen molecule to the tissues. This green fruit right here, grape, represents the carbon dioxide that it collected from the cell's tissue, from this tissue cell right here, not vegetables, but a cell's tissue. So this would represent the carbonic acid, or it could also be bound to hemoglobin. When it's bound to hemoglobin, or it becomes when it's bound to hemoglobin, or becomes a bicarbonate a carbonic acid, excuse me, is transferred. Let's see, transferred. Once the red blood cells come here, this long tube right here is the alveolar sac, little sacs right here. These are the bronchioles. And these are the small, can't really see alveolar sacs. So when the red blood cell comes, it releases it. Don't want it no more. Whoosh. Then the cycle repeats.